The rain had been falling since dawn, tapping endlessly against my windows like an old song I couldn't turn off. The sky was a heavy gray, the kind that made you want to curl up with a blanket and a good book. I had just finished my coffee and was halfway into folding laundry when I heard the knock at my door. At first, I thought it was just the wind rattling the porch furniture, but the second knock was unmistakable, firm, deliberate, and slightly urgent. I hesitated. Nobody usually came by without a call or a text. My neighbor, Claire, sometimes stopped over to borrow sugar or chat, but she had mentioned she'd be out of town visiting her sister. When I opened the door, I was met with the sight of a man standing on the porch, rain dripping from his dark hair, his jacket clinging to him as though he'd walked through a storm without an umbrella. "Hi," he said, his voice low but clear. "Sorry to bother you. I'm looking for Claire. She told me I could stop by today, but I think I might have the wrong time." His presence caught me off guard. There was something in his expression, half apologetic, half unreadable, that made me feel both cautious and curious. He was about 6 feet tall, maybe a little more, with sharp features softened by the dampness of the rain. "Claire isn't here," I replied carefully. "She went out of town." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable.
"Oh."
"She told me she'd be around. I'm Daniel, a friend of hers." The rain poured harder, cascading off the roof in heavy sheets. I glanced behind him at the gray curtain of water, then back at his damp clothes. Against my better judgment, I found myself saying, "You can come in and wait if you'd like. She might be back later this evening." Something flickered in his eyes, gratitude, maybe relief. He stepped inside, wiping his shoes on the mat. The warmth of the house seemed to change his whole demeanor. "I really appreciate it," he said. "I didn't expect the weather to turn like this." As I led him toward the living room, I reminded myself that he was a stranger. I didn't know him, not really, but there was an odd sense of familiarity about him, as though he belonged here somehow. I offered him a towel, and he dried his hair quickly before running a hand over his face. That's when I noticed his eyes, deep, stormy blue, the kind that looked like they carried stories untold. "I'm Emily," I introduced myself, trying to break the silence. "I live next door to Claire." "Nice to meet you, Emily," he said with a small smile. Claire mentioned she had a neighbor who kept an eye on things. She didn't tell me her neighbor was this kind. I laughed softly, not sure if it was a compliment or just polite conversation. Still, the way he said it made my chest tighten unexpectedly. I made him tea, and as the storm raged on outside, we sat across from each other in the living room. The conversation started with small talk, where he was from, how he knew Claire. He explained that they'd gone to college together, and he had been passing through town for work when she invited him to stop by. But the longer we talked, the more I realized he revealed just enough to answer a question without really giving much away. He was guarded, mysterious in a way that both unsettled and intrigued me. Hours passed, the rain showing no sign of letting up. The storm had a way of closing the world in, making it feel like we were suspended in time, just two people inside a cocoon of thunder and water. It wasn't until the lights flickered and went out that my heart skipped. The room fell into darkness, broken only by the occasional flash of lightning through the windows. "Well," Daniel said, his voice steady in the dark, "guess we're in for a real storm." I found a couple of candles in the kitchen and lit them. Their glow cast soft shadows across his face, making his features look sharper, more mysterious. "Do storms always knock out the power here?" he asked. "Sometimes," I admitted. "This area has old power lines." As thunder rolled across the sky, I realized how unusual this day had become. I had let a stranger into my home, a friend of a friend, but still a stranger. Yet there was something magnetic about him, something that made me feel both wary and drawn in. At one point, while telling me about his travels, his eyes met mine and held them. The sound of the rain seemed to fade, replaced by the quiet hum of something unspoken between us. I looked away first, pretending to check the candles. But the air had shifted. The hours blurred as we talked, sometimes in easy laughter, other times in quiet reflection. He told me he used to love storms as a child, how he would sit by the window and imagine adventures in faraway lands. I admitted that I often found storms lonely, though tonight felt different. It wasn't until nearly midnight that I realized how long he had stayed. "Claire won't be back tonight," I finally said, standing to stretch. "She'll probably call you when she gets in tomorrow." Daniel nodded, but instead of leaving, he looked out the window at the unrelenting rain. "I don't think I should drive in this. Would it be too much to ask if I stayed on your couch?" The sensible part of me hesitated, but the storm outside made the thought of sending him away seem reckless. After a long pause, I said, "All right. The couch folds out into a bed. You can stay here tonight." He gave me that look again, one that carried both gratitude and a trace of something deeper. "Thank you, Emily. I promise I'll be out of your way in the morning." I prepared the couch, and as I handed him a blanket, our hands brushed briefly. It was nothing, an accident really, but the warmth that lingered made my heart race. That night, I lay awake longer than I expected, listening to the rain and wondering why a stranger's presence in my home felt less frightening than the silence usually did. When morning came, the storm had passed. The sky was washed clean, sunlight breaking through the clouds. I came downstairs to find Daniel already awake, folding the blanket neatly. "Good morning," he said, offering me a smile that felt softer than the night before. "Good morning," I replied. Before I could say anything else, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Claire stood there, suitcase in hand, surprise flashing across her face when she saw Daniel. "Daniel?" she asked, then glanced at me. "Emily? What's going on?" In that moment, I realized the story was only just beginning, because sometimes letting someone in, whether by choice or by accident, sets off a chain of events that changes everything. And as Claire stepped into the doorway, her eyes narrowing with questions she didn't ask, I knew the rainy day that brought Daniel into my life was the start of a mystery I hadn't yet begun to unravel.